Hi again. In this episode, we are going to address what is the secret to achieving abundance. And I'm going to share with you some of the most incredible secrets that I have learned working with people for 45 years who have a lot of money. Some of them are even billionaires, but they're not the happiest people in the world. They don't really have what I call abundance or true or authentic wealth. So I'm going to frame this with you in what we call 3 dimensions of true or authentic wealth to help you understand what abundance really means and how you can teach your children and grandchildren about what life is really all about. It's not just about the money. So I'm Doug Andrew, and I've helped a lot of people optimize their assets for more than 45 years. Many times as I travel, because I speak many times a year all over the country, and I will be on an airplane and snoozing, and when the pilot or flight attendant comes over the intercom and says, "Hey, we're approaching, put your seat in the most upright, uncomfortable position." You know, you wake up and the person next to you wakes up, and we usually introduce ourselves for the first time after flying from Chicago or New York back to the West Coast. And they'll say, "So what do you do?" And I'll pull out a Delta Airlines napkin and I'll draw a great big A on the napkin like this, which stands for abundance. And I'll say, well, I help people optimize assets. And then I say, when we say that word assets, what kinds of things do most people think of first when we say the word assets? I let them talk and they'll usually share with me, well, your house, your cash, your stocks, your bonds, your real estate, and so forth. I say, yep, those are financial assets, but those are just really material possessions, aren't they? They're just things, but we put these under the financial dimension, but that's what most people think of first when I say that word, assets. Let me rephrase it with this tonality. What are the most important assets that you value, that you cherish, that you possess on this earth? Now they know I'm not talking about money. And so the first response I get is family, the relationships. The next might be health. We appreciate good health in our family. My wife has technically died 3 times and come back. We appreciate good health. The third answer I get is values, your beliefs, your faith. These kinds of assets involve people. So we call these human assets. They are our core assets. So I put these under the foundational assets for abundant living. They would also include your well-being, spirituality, talents, future, heritage, character, friends, charitable foundations, and so forth. There's a third dimension of authentic wealth that involves the wisdom that we gain throughout our life, and that's our intellectual assets. Now, wisdom is a product of knowledge times experiences, and not just the good ones. I've actually learned more from my bad experiences in life, and that gives us our wisdom, but also would include your formal education, reputation, systems, methods, traditions, alliances, ideas, and skills. Now, these are the 3 dimensions of authentic wealth. Now, it's interesting, there is a 4th category of assets that for most intents and purposes, people flat out give up choice and control. So let me take a side trip and explain what that one is and why people get off track when we talk about this, because this one actually transcends all 3 dimensions. So most governmental systems in the world have a method whereby we must give back to society. And that normally comes in the form of taxes. These are our civic or social assets, and most of the time, governments will just tax people. Now that's okay. I'm a red-blooded American. I think we should all pay our fair share of tax. But in actuality, we can give our time and our talents to the causes we believe in and have more impact than just writing out bigger and bigger checks to the government in taxes. I have seen this over and over again. I serve on a volunteer basis for teenage suicide prevention. I also help out at the crisis center with these suicidal teenagers. My wife works at the Christmas box with the little children that are in protective custody because they've been in abusive homes. And when we do that, I have 42 volunteers that help me. And some of these volunteers command over $100,000 an hour as consultants in corporate America, but they will turn down opportunities to go out and make $100,000 to $200,000 to come and devote time to 12 or 15 or 20 teenagers that have attempted suicide. They've been cutting and so forth, because the impact of time with those teenagers sometimes is greater than if they wrote out a check for $1 million. Several of them could do that. They could just write out a check for $1 million and say, let the counselors deal with these kids. Well, even the counselors say we accomplish more in 1 hour than they do in 3 weeks of counseling, because they know what the teenagers have done. They know what they're thinking and so forth, but we walk in and we're non-judgmental. We're not allowed to know what their hang-ups are, or if they have drug addictions or other addictions. We just simply want to lift them up. So I've turned down opportunities to speak for Tony Robbins. Now, I've spoken for Tony Robbins 2 or 3 times, but I know I could go down there and make $250,000 at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas at one of his events. But instead, sometimes I've chosen to be in front of a dozen teenagers because the impact is greater than just making more money. So that's what I mean by giving your time and your talents. But in the government system, we have taxes. Now, taxes are actually an asset. When I talk about that, that's the title of chapter 2 of my second book called Misfortune 101 that became a national bestseller. We went through 500,000 copies of that. What I mean by that is when I fly to California, I get to drive on Interstate 10 or the I-5 because I help pay for those freeways. Now, we may not agree with how the government is a steward over certain public assets and how they may waste our tax dollars. Let's not go there right now. But see, we all own those freeways. So what we want to do is make sure that we optimize the taxes we pay, but many times we can redirect otherwise payable taxes to causes we support by taking ownership. Now, the key to American wealth has always been in ownership. Deeds, titles, articles of incorporation. Countries who do not allow their citizens to own, like North Korea. I lived in South Korea for 2 years, and it's vibrant, dynamic. They're booming. North Korea is starving to death, and they have to act like they have to blackmail the world. We're going to make nuclear weapons if you don't give us aid. And so it's really not about making nuclear weapons. It's about the blackmail that they've gotten away with for 3 generations. Oh, we're going to make nuclear warheads if you don't give us help. Well, when my friend went to North Korea and saw that they were starving to death, it's because they don't own anything. He would go into the fields and they'd look like a hurricane hit them, and they'd say, we don't own anything over here. But many times he was only allowed to go into certain areas of North Korea or down certain roads where they were threatened with their lives if they did not make that rice field or that cornfield look great. But 5 rows into the cornfield, the rest of it looked like it was hit by a hurricane. It's really the difference if you've ever seen that picture from outer space of the Korean peninsula. North Korea is dark with one light at nighttime emitting from the presidential compound, versus South Korea is lit up like Las Vegas or Los Angeles. Light, dark, ownership, non-ownership. And so ownership is what allows people to redirect otherwise payable taxes to causes they support. So that's what I mean by this. So for example, when you take ownership in a home, you'll take better care of it than if you rent one. In America, we incentivize people to own a home. The cheapest money I can obtain is to buy a home. I can pay 3, 4, 4.5% interest on that mortgage, and I can deduct it because it's an incentive, and we have a higher standard of living because we own property in this country. So when I borrow money at 4.5% to buy a home, it's only a net cost of 3% because I'm able to tax deduct it, and so I save 1/3 of that in otherwise payable tax. If I take ownership for my own retirement, instead of relying on the government to provide it for me, there are good ways, IRAs or 401ks. There are better ways, Roths, and I can prove to you a Roth is probably 33% better than a traditional IRA or 401k. If you think taxes are going to be higher in the future because of irresponsible government spending and the printing of money. But I don't own an IRA or 401k or a Roth, never have, never will. My favorite vehicle is what I call the laser fund, and it allows me to accumulate access and transfer my money tax-free. And people say, oh, when the IRS finds out that one, they'll close that loophole. No, it's because I'm taking total ownership. Whether I die sooner or later. Whether I leave behind my sweetheart earlier or later, or my kids, they will never be a drain on society. I have taken care of that. I insure myself. I make sure my money grows tax-free. And why is it tax-free? Because I'm taking ownership for my future. I don't need Social Security benefits. I can do way better than the government. But see, when people choose not to take ownership, the government always tries to do it for them, and they're not very good at it. In fact, I think they're pretty lousy at it. But the key here is to be able to understand how to redirect otherwise payable taxes to causes that you support. That's why I teach people how to take ownership not only of the financial dimension, but also here, and set up what I call a family bank. And this is where true abundance comes from. This is like a three-legged stool. And sometimes people are just focused on money, 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 and they're wobbling on just finances, maybe at the expense of their health or their relationships with their kids or grandkids or their God. So people come to us to take the wobble out of their life and be balanced in these three dimensions, and then they begin to experience abundance, and then they teach this to their kids and grandkids, and abundance breeds abundance, and it's an incredible way to live. And that's what I want for you. So if this message is resonating with you and you want to gain more balance, to have abundance in your own life and focus on the three dimensions of what I call authentic wealth, I would encourage you to watch several other educational videos and episodes where I talk about this and I explain the difference between the Vanderbilts and the Rothschilds. If you simply want to read and learn about this, I wrote a book called Entitlement Abolition, and I would love to gift you absolutely free a copy of this book. It's about 200 pages, comprised of 12 chapters. The first 4 chapters talk about how we get in these traps of entitlement, and the last 8 chapters talk about how to break free from that trap and enjoy abundance, and abundance breeds abundance, and it's an incredible way to live. If you go to entitlementabolitionbook.com, you just pay a nominal shipping and handling fee, and I will fire out a copy of this free. And there's some other curriculum in there you can choose if you want to dive deeper. I've actually done a master class on this where I do a deep dive for 18 hours, but each chapter is like a 15 or 20 minute read. This will help empower you to enjoy abundance in your life, and that's my hope for you. I do this for people like you who are seeking to experience the abundance in life that I think our Creator wants for every one of us. And I would like it in the greatest portion for you too.